Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name is Jonty, and there's no Melky, and there's no Laura. Is it to do with the sinister little words you just heard? Could be. Actually, those sinister words are in honor of the subject that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about a play called The Devil's Passion, which is the story of the Passion of the Christ, the story of the Passion of Jesus, the Good Friday story, the Bad Friday story, from the perspective of the devil. The whole play is from the perspective of the devil, and we're going to be talking to the writer and star of that one-man show, and his name's Justin Butcher. He's a very nice man. We're going to be talking to him about a whole bunch of stuff, including Israel-Palestine, because he is an activist, campaigner, advocacy guy, artist about that, as well as the play itself, which is so cool. And you should know that the play is showing on Palm Sunday in London, and there's details about that at the end of the show. So you should listen to the end so that you can go and watch a show. Buy yourself some tickets to The Devil's Passion by Justin Butcher. Also, a special shout out will go to anybody who works out what that 80s style backwards masking was at the beginning of the show. But yeah, here's an interview, me and Justin Butcher. Excuse the weird sound quality. I'm in a relatively empty house in South Africa, and I have a cold. So, yeah, it's sounding echoey. I think that sounds kind of sinister, actually. That's lame. I'm sorry. I'm going to leave it in because, editing is hard. But I hope you enjoy the show. And here is me and Justin Butcher. Here are me and Justin Butcher. Justin Butcher, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jonty. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah.
So for listeners, would you like to tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do?
For sure, yes. Actor, writer, director, producer, musician, and a bit of everything, really. And I'm currently touring my solo show, The Devil's Passion, in Italy and the UK. This is coming up for a big performance in London this coming Sunday, Palm Sunday, at the Union Chapel in Islington. I've been working as a kind of a theatre practitioner for 30 years or so in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, Australia, America, and alongside my work in the theatre, I work also in the church. I work as a musician, a director of music in a sort of thriving parish church in North London, St. Luke's, West Holloway, and waving my arm at the choir,
Nice.
And then I work closely also with the human rights charity, the Amos Trust.
Great charity.
Yeah, Amos Trust is a creative human rights organization with a Christian sort of foundation and vision, which supports partners in Nicaragua, South Africa, Tanzania, Palestine, and India. And my particular collaboration with them is in the arena of Israel-Palestine. And I've been there a number of times with Amos Trust and collaborated on producing all kinds of creative projects over the years. Advocacy, I suppose, the best term is to talk about sort of human rights creative advocacy projects with Amos, producing plays, concerts, tours of Palestinian artists in the UK. In 2013, 2014, I produced the Bethlehem Unwrapped Festival.
Which was fantastic.
Thank you. This is where we work with the community of St. James's Church, Piccadilly, and over Christmas 2013 built a full-size replica of the separation wall across the courtyard of that beautiful Christopher Wren church, kind of blotting out the church for the whole of Christmas, and then put on a festival of solidarity with the people of Bethlehem, involving live music, theatre, dance, comedy, debates, films, and so on, and cuisine as well. And then in 2017, I conceived and jointly led the walk to Jerusalem with Amos Trust, the Just Walk to Jerusalem, from London to Jerusalem. Yeah. So, I've kind of found myself at this kind of, I always say, the meeting point, the nexus, the crossroads of creativity, faith, and human rights work over the last 30 years. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people out there who have, especially through what's been happening in Gaza and the war on the people of Gaza that's been happening, a lot of people who have thought the church either is not involved in this or it's involved in very much the wrong way. A lot of Christian Zionists out there advocating for violence against Palestinians and Palestinian civilians and seeming to diminish all of that. And yet, you've been doing this for years, and there have been Christians and are Christian organizations that are working for human rights. Is it just that there's not that many, or do you think that churches prefer not to talk about it?
It's the single hottest potato, isn't it, of any kind of human rights issue, conflict, struggle, probably anywhere in the world, because of the backdrop, the history of the creation of the State of Israel and the Second World War and the Holocaust and all of these things, of the obvious reasons. It's the single hottest potato, and I think. I mean, a lot of the Palestinian partner organizations, which Amos Trust supports in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and so on, have talked about being the origins of Christianity. That in fact, this is the original church.
Yeah.
In Palestine. A lot of Christians in other parts of the world forget that Christianity was born in historic Palestine. Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus, and the Palestinian Christians, who now represent, of course, a very small minority of the population, because so many have left, are the indigenous church of the Holy Land, and one of the roles that Amos Trust has performed, I think, very effectively over the years, is to amplify those voices, of what is the experience of Palestinian Christians living in West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the reality which they experience on a daily basis is of a harsh military occupation, and of constant grinding injustice and provocation, every sort of trip that I've made to Israel, Palestine has left me coming away sort of with a mixture of, on the one hand, a feeling of extraordinary injustice and anguish and anger and so on, because you see the reality of the occupation all around you, and the cruelty, the pettiness, the unfairness. You see it absolutely kind of stark. But one also meets extraordinary people doing amazing work in non-violent resistance, in bridge building, in creative, reconciliation work, and I always have come away feeling equally uplifted, sort of somehow hopeful, despite the kind of geopolitical realities on the ground. So I don't know if I'm answering what you've said, really. I suppose
it doesn't matter as long as the answers are interesting. They are. That's good.
I mean, my sense. Here's another way of answering the question. In 2014, I worked closely with Layla Sansour, who is a Christian Palestinian filmmaker from Bethlehem, and she produced an amazing film called Open Bethlehem, about her city and the kind of encroachment of Israel's occupation and settlement building, on the city of Bethlehem, building the wall around it, building settlements all around it, this film talks about the ancient history of Bethlehem and the surviving Palestinian Christian church there in Bethlehem and so on. I collaborated in producing the launch at the Royal Geographical Society in London in 2014. And since then, Layla has been touring the world to Christian communities, particularly in America, showing her film and speaking as a Palestinian Christian about the experience of life under the occupation. And so, I think there is a job to do of educating Christian communities around the world. Another example is the Kairos Palestine project.
Marvelous project, yeah.
Absolutely. I think in 2012, if I have that right, launched a call to churches, the ecumenical community around the world, calling for Christian churches to speak out and to stand in solidarity with the churches of the Holy Land, the united churches of the Holy Land, and to condemn Israel's ongoing occupation and the siege of Gaza, because they in fact, the declaration, the Kairos Palestine Declaration, calls on churches around the world to condemn the occupation and the siege as a sin because they cause so much suffering. Yeah. And this was modeled directly on the Kairos original document in South Africa, which was launched by Desmond Tutu and the churches of South Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the grinding injustice and provocation, and then the kind of Christian, and particularly international Christian, but I imagine local Christian as well, though I don't want to speak for them, non-violent approach. Does it ever feel like that might be, that there may be a tension there where you may be being unhelpful to the kind of Palestinian struggle? Or for you, is that just, as Christians, we have to be clearly pro-non-violence? Pro-non-violence is such an awkward way of saying this, but anti-violence. Just because I think, if anything, that the last few months of events in Palestine has brought up, it's been many people within the discourse saying, does Palestine not have a right to self-defense? And I know that there were a lot of calls during apartheid in South Africa to stop the armed struggle in the name of peace, but with no real sense of justice coming out. I just wonder if that's ever been a tension for you in your activism work, and particularly in the space that you occupy, where you are possibly forming opinions.
For sure. It's a good question. I mean, many people have talked about the assertion in the Geneva Convention of the right of an occupied people to resist that occupation by whatever means. And one can think of plenty of examples from history of occupied peoples exercising that right. The ethos and the approach of Amos Trust in supporting its partner organizations in the Palestinian territories, the Holy Land Trust in Bethlehem, the We Am Reconciliation Center, Al Rawad Cultural Arts Center and Theater for young people, and ICAD, based in Israel, Jeff Halper's organization, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and the Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza City, and the Near East Council of Churches program for women's employment and education also in Gaza. The ethos and the vision which Amos has chosen to support is mostly in this area of creative nonviolent resistance, in the belief that, ultimately, that approach, if you look at historic examples, Gandhi in India, of much of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement, that the approach of nonviolent resistance, creative resistance, is the best the best approach and more likely to win, and to overturn the structures of injustice. Whether or not the Palestinian people, suffering under a harsh military occupation, have the right to armed resistance, the fact remains that every instance, of Palestinian violence provides the justification for an ever harsher response from Israel. And so, while I think one should be robust in condemning any violence against civilians, there's clearly an almost symbiotic relationship, between the armed struggle, if you want to call it that, and Israel's ongoing occupation, because every instance of violence provides the justification. Well, look, you see, there they are. They're terrorists and they want to kill us. And therefore, there can be no discussion. There can be no negotiation. There can be no, we don't have a partner for peace. This kind of thing. So I mean, I think there are various good reasons, why the creative nonviolent approach is right. And actually the most effective as well. I think of some of the cultural projects I've got involved in. Back in 2016, working with Amos Trust, I was involved in bringing the Al Rawad Youth Theatre to a tour, the UK, a group of 13 Palestinian dancers and singers aged between 13 and 18. And the response from audiences in the UK, hearing their stories, seeing their work, meeting them and so on, was so extraordinary and inspiring and moving. And I think the battle, in a way, in communication is to help people to understand that these people are human beings with amazing culture and dignity, and resilience, and creativity, not terrorists and troublemakers and all the stereotypes, which pertain, in a lot of Western media and perception.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I love about your play, The Devil's Passion, is that you bring a genuine, what seems to me a beautiful encapsulation of the alternative vision for living and justice that Christ offers as we understand him in Christianity. And yet it's not a status quo affirming, peace in inverted commas, but what it really means is no change, no justice, no move towards that. It seems to be this, I don't know, I just think it's such a wonderful play for that. And I love the fact that, without giving too much away, that it opens up as talking about this dangerous extremist who's going to be coming into Jerusalem. And you're like, okay, so far so, Middle East thriller, and then you start realizing who it is. And I just think this isn't a question so much. I'm just fangirling a little bit, but it's just like it's such a great thing. And I wonder, For me, what was surprising was I was expecting to go, because I've seen it before, and I was expecting to go and see something that was in keeping with my own politics. But usually when I see Christian stuff that's in keeping with my own politics, it shies away from the quite powerful imagery of the spiritual. And in your play, you've got these gates that fall, which, the part of my little Pentecostal heart that I'm just like, my people would get this. Rulers and principalities, now we're talking. And this is a very long way to introduce a question of, do you think the church has, the progressive church, the church of the left, has missed a trick by adopting non-spiritual, secular, perhaps even anti-religious language so much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are always stereotypical polarizations, aren't there? I mean, the Devil's Passion attempts to come at the Passion story in a new way, telling the story of the Passion of Christ, the last days of Jesus from the devil's perspective. It's set in a modern kind of it's sort of both. It's sort of ancient world and a modern setting. It's like an occupied Palestine with checkpoints, barbed wire, CCTV cameras, drones, all of that kind of apparatus of modern surveillance and espionage and so on. And set up in a way like the hunt for bin Laden, or like an episode of Homeland or something like that. And the devil presents himself as this kind of security chief, CIA director type character who is masterminding a counter-terrorism sting. And so there's all of that setting. And the sense, obviously, of the depiction of the Holy Land is a realm characterized by harsh divisions, barriers, and segregation, between Jew and Samaritan, between the indigenous people and the hated military occupier, between clean and unclean, slave and free, male and female. And Jesus is presented as this kind of divine disruptor, this radical disruptor who breaks down these barriers, who is constantly breaching these different gates or barriers to connect with those who are deemed unclean or untouchable, to reconcile those who are at enmity. And this is an appalling disturbance from the point of view of the devil, who wants everything exactly as it is. He wants everyone neatly imprisoned in their silos. I suppose the play does toy with the question, or invite the viewer to ponder the question about the nature of evil, of spiritual evil. Is it simply a word we use to describe the effect and the nature of our actions and intentions? Or is there some kind of concept or an entity, of spiritual evil, which is at work in the world? And I don't think the play resolves that question. I don't know the answer actually either, ultimately, whether this is all important symbolic language, or whether we're whether we're sort of engaging and in combat with a spiritual sort of reality. Traditional Catholic teaching has talked about the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I think the way, for example, Richard Rohr writes about this, where he talks about the world as being the system, not the world in terms of a natural world, but more the socio-political systems, which we create. The flesh, again, not the body, but more individual, our individual actions and individual responsibility for wrongdoing, and the devil as sanctified or romanticized violence, that sort of where we give a flag and a narrative and a justification to systems of injustice and violence, which then become beyond question, and gain a kind of identity or entity. Walter Wink wrote interestingly about powers and principalities, and the idea that these entities, corporations, teams, clubs, tribes, nations, have some sort of daimon, some kind of power or identity, presiding spirit, which is somehow greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
That can exercise a hold over people, and that part of the call to faith, is to become really aware of these things, to become conscious of these things, and to engage critically, with the narratives which sort of swim around us. And I think, yes, the play probes those kinds of issues constantly. It's interesting. I mean, I also think about it's an amazing sequence in E.M. Forster's novel, The Passage to India, where, for those who don't know it, the story, it's really about the attempt by Dr. Aziz, the protagonist, to form meaningful friendships and connections with British people. It's set in the Indian Raj, and Dr. Aziz is a doctor. We're probably talking about it's set in the 1920s, I think, he loves the British and wants to get to know them better. He's very friendly with Mr. Fielding, the local school teacher, and he meets Mrs. Moore and her ward, Adela, and organizes a trip to the Marabar Caves, which are an important heritage site close to the city. And there, some kind of strange thing happens where Miss Quested, Adela, has a disturbing encounter with the caves, with the extraordinary echo of the Marabar Caves, and then rushes out and rushes down the mountain and falls over and tumbles in the thorns and gets herself into an appalling state. And then comes out with this story that Dr. Aziz has molested her. And at that point, this extraordinary wave of evil is unleashed, where suddenly the entire British community is sort of rising up against this appalling man who has dared to molest a young British woman. And equally, a huge tide of anger and sense of injustice rises up amongst the indigenous people. A brilliant film by David Lean, and the novel, I really commend it, actually, E.M. Forster, A Passage to India. But there's an amazing sequence in that where Mrs. Moore, the very wise old lady, reflects on her experience of the echo in the caves. What had spoken to her in that scoured out cavity of the granite? What dwelt in the first of the caves? Something very old and very small. Before time, it was before space also. Something snub-nosed, incapable of generosity, the undying worm itself. Since hearing its voice, she had not entertained one large thought. She was actually envious of Adela. All this fuss over a frightened girl. Nothing had happened. And if it had, she found herself thinking with the cynicism of a withered priestess. If it had, there are worse evils than love. The unspeakable attempt presented itself to her as love in a cave, in a church. boom, it amounts to the same thing. Visions are supposed to entail profundity, but wait till you get one, dear reader. The abyss may also be petty, the serpent of eternity made of maggots. A constant thought was less attention should be paid to my future daughter-in-law and more to me. There is no sorrow like my sorrow. And I find that that's
shit. That's so good. I haven't read that since you did. That is
brilliant.
so good.
I'm reflecting, when I wrote The Devil's Passion, and also, reflecting on these thoughts around the concept of evil. I thought of also Iago's lines at the end of Othello, where he's finally been revealed as the villain who has masterminded the downfall of all of the principal characters. And Othello says, Iago is now held captive. And he says, I look down towards his feet, but that's a fable. In other words, it's like he's saying, well, if he had cloven hoofs, I would understand, because he'd be the devil. If that thou beest a devil, I cannot kill thee. Will you, I pray, demand that demi-devil why he hath thus ensnared my soul and body? And Iago says, demand me nothing. What you know, you know. From this time forth, I never will speak word. In other words, there's no explanation. Yeah. All of this wickedness, all of this hate, this malice, everything which he has perpetrated, he has nothing to say at the end. I also think of Hannah Arendt's comments about Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal who was put on trial in the 1960s, and the journalist and academic Hannah Arendt went to write about him and his trial, and wrote this extraordinary piece, The Banality of Evil, and seeking some kind of insight into the magnitude of the scale of the evil of the Holocaust. She was astounded by the pettiness of the man, and wrote, despite all the efforts of the prosecution, everybody could see that this man was not a monster, but it was difficult indeed not to suspect that he was a clown.
Yeah.
So, I'm interested in this sort of the way in which evil, firstly, masquerades as good. And of course, that's why people fall for it, is because it can be so closely intertwined with the good. But also how ultimately the sort of the selfishness, tribalism, violence, pettiness, unfairness, which writ large, can produce untold suffering in the world. In a sense, all of it, in a way, has no explanation other than the endless projection of the small self, our selfishness and fear and control and pride.
But that passage from the Passage to India reminds me of a lot of the things I was taught as a teenager in an evangelical church before I had any faith. But they would talk about, well, you commit that one little sin, and then there's this cascade effect, which at the time seemed very catastrophizing to me and over-egging it a little bit. But the more I think about it, the more I think that's how it starts, with this small injustice, with that small pettiness, with that just small, the yeast of nationalism or imperialism or racism or sexism or homophobia or any of that kind of stuff, that without that act being intended to cause it, ends up causing this untold horror to people. And again, Pentecostals should jump on that shit.
For sure. No, for sure. And my characterization of the devil in The Devil's Passion exactly follows that idea that you're talking about of, he has this sort of whole lecture almost on the importance of pain, that he's saying only corruption is fertile, and the wonderful thing about sort of evil and pain and so on is the glorious rampant multiplication through of that pain and those evil acts down a lifetime span of trauma, self-loathing, rage, and revenge. And this, selfishness then it causes suffering, and of course he says suffering produces nobility. Because after all, you can't breed Gandhis, Mandelas, and Martin Luther Kings on motherhood and apple pie and 4 square meals a day. And it was a sort of a piece of fun, I suppose, on my part, was to try to weave as much truth as possible in with these lies, to try and make the devil as beguiling and convincing as possible in the characterization in the play. Because evil, if it has any substance and any traction, in the world, is usually carried out by people who think they're doing good or persuade themselves that they're doing good. It's not usually carried out by people who know that they're doing something wrong. We convince ourselves about the rightness of our actions, the rightness of our systems, the necessity, of our systems of greed and pride and unfairness and injustice and exploitation. And we find all kinds of ways and narratives of explaining how these things are right and proper and necessary and what's due to us, and projected into the world the collective impact of those attitudes and choices can create incredible suffering and violence and injustice. But in fact, because the devil is a liar, Jesus characterizes the devil as a liar in the Gospels and the father of lies. Of course, he's wrong when he says that good actions don't have the same fertility, the same fecundity. I mean, Jesus said it all the time. He said the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, a tiny seed, and when it falls to the ground, and then this extraordinary thing grows from it. And I think that, this is another reason, really, why I find so inspiring the work of some of the partners that Amos Trust supports in the Palestinian territories in Israel, Palestine, is that it's about a belief in the enduring power and the abundant power of acts of love, kindness, generosity, and creativity to inspire people and to inspire more of the same, in people's lives. How many of us can point to some significant act that was done to support us or encourage us by some great, parent or an uncle or an elder or a grandparent or a teacher, or a patron of some sort in our lives, which has inspired us, ever since. And so I think that I do believe that, the power of good and the power of love and generosity, forgiveness, and kindness, in the economy of God, springs a harvest beyond what we can ever see or imagine.
Well, Justin, I think you've encapsulated it beautifully, and you set it out as a vision and almost an ideology in the negative, obviously, in the Devil's Passion, and I think you do it beautifully. And I hope many people go to see the play. Remind people where they can see it soon.
Yeah, well, I'm currently touring Italy in collaboration with J Productions Milan, my partner and collaborator here, Julia Holden and her company J Productions, based in Milan. So tonight we're at St. Mark's Church, Anglican Church in Florence, and also tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in just an hour and a quarter, and then we come to London this weekend to the Union Chapel in Islington at 7:30, and that performance is a charity fundraiser for the Amos Trust Emergency Appeal for Gaza. So we're really calling on friends in London to spread the word about that. And then we return to Italy next week for 2 performances at the Anglican Church in Rome, All Saints Church in Rome, on Tuesday the 26th and Wednesday the 27th. And then we put the show to bed for Easter.
Nice. And if people want to delve a bit deeper, which I would advise, you can buy the text as well of the play. Where's best to go to for that?
Bloomsbury, publisher, published the Devil's Passion, and through their website, it's available. But all the usual stuff, Amazon and all those places.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
And for details of the tour, you can visit either my website, justinbutcher.co.uk, or the J Productions website, which is www.jproductions.it, which will give all the tour dates and booking information and so on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Justin, thank you so much for your time, for joining us on Beer Christianity, and all the best for the rest of the tour.
So great to see you. Thanks so much for your encouragement and, for having me on the show. Thank you.
If this is your first time listening to Beer Christianity, you can find out more about the show at beerchristianity.co.uk. You can email us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook, everywhere really. And come and check out our stuff. Usually there's 2 other people who are on the show with me, but they are busy and otherwise engaged, so I did this on my own. But go and check out our previous episodes, beerchristianity.co.uk. Let us know what you think, and go watch the show or definitely read the play. Thanks for listening, and goodbye!